What's good, y'all? It's been just over a month since the release of SMTV Vengeance. The game has generally been received well, and the sales numbers back that up, with the re-release selling 500,000 copies in its first 72 hours. There's a lot to talk about here, with the countless additions within the overworld, music, battle system, etc. However, I will save that for a more comprehensive video as I haven't played through the entire updated canon of creation yet. What I will talk about is the story and characters, which is largely considered why this updated version of the game is such a substantial improvement from the 2021 original. Just to set the record straight, I definitely like the story overall, and it's very clearly a massive improvement from vanilla SMT5. But it's one of those stories that I would consider a chaotic mess of sorts. It has some moments that I would honestly consider to be the best in the entire franchise, but alongside that, some stuff that just doesn't make sense and is poorly placed, to the point where I can't say it's even near the level of something like SMT4 or Digital Devil Saga, for example. If you haven't realized already, this video is a recap / analysis for the game, so spoilers if you haven't played or finished SMT5 Vengeance yet. I would advise returning to this video in the future if you haven't done so. That being said, there's a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it. Although this video will be more Vengeance focused, I will be making many comparisons to the canon of creation. Doing so is pretty much inevitable as the first act of the game is very similar with few key differences. Keep in mind that I'm assuming that those watching are either familiar with or have already played through either the canon of creation or vanilla SMT5 for contextual understanding of certain events. The intro sequence of the game plays out the exact same way aside from the protagonist waking up in this eerie space where he sees the new re-release girl, Yoko, floating in between branching pathways. As the MC reaches out to her, voices echo telling him not to do so. There's no confirmation as to who these voices are, but due to reasons that we will see later on, I assume that these people's voices are those of the Great Will. They tell MC that the world is bound to be destroyed with her alive, and that he must stray back to the righteous path. The first change from the canon of Vengeance is found right before you gain access to Demon Fusion, where the protagonist finds Yuzuru observing some train tracks. When discussing their whereabouts, they get attacked by Glacia Labialis, and in this scene, Yoko Hiromene is introduced as an exorcist from St. Marina Girls Academy, which is presumably in the same area as Join High School. Yoko follows us around Minato, and as the party approaches the Tokyo Diet Building, they have a battle with Nama of the Qadištu, who lures Yoko and MC into an alternate space. This is where Aishith, Egret, and Lilith are shown for the first time as well. Again, nothing changes from the creation route until the end of this area, including the boss fight with Nua. The school arc between Act 1 and 2 is still present here. This time, it's a bit more fleshed out as it pertains to Miyazu. Nothing crazy, but at least they gave her some build-up and dialogue, unlike the original. The conversation with Tao on the rooftop afterward is partly the exact same, until Yoko interjects and tells Tao that if she really wants to stop her best friend from being bullied,
then ask yourself if you're willing to kill the girls bullying her.
The next day, while MC is commuting to school, he has a run-in with Nama and Glacia Labialis, wreaking havoc on innocent people. In the game's first certified goofball moment, the protag realizes that he actually doesn't have a lightning sword attached to his hands when the blue magical man isn't fused with him and he nearly gets killed. Thankfully, Aogami shows up at the last possible second and they fend off the intruders. Instead of fighting Lamu at Jozoji Temple, you go straight to the school. This is where distinct writing changes begin to be seen, as Yoko and Tao join your party as you make your way up to saving Sahori on the top floor of the school. Here, groundwork for how the two characters behave and interact is established. Tao and Yoko are virtual opposites in terms of emotionally processing things and engaging in conflict. From this point on, there will be guest characters in your party for the next two arcs of the game. This dynamic between Yoko and Tao isn't perfect in my opinion, but it gives some much needed exposition and character interactions that make the experience as a whole a lot less barren. Yoko's influence as a whole makes Tao a way more interesting character. Aogami even alludes to it. Once we get to Lamu, instead of trying to stop Sahori from murdering her classmates, it seems like Tao really took Yoko's advice to heart, despite meeting her less than 48 hours ago. In all seriousness, as much as the advice is insane to actually say to someone, it really does make a bit of sense. Bullying normally continues until victims retaliate in a significant fashion. and the fact that Yoko tells Tao that there is nothing that Sahori would want more than for her oppressors to disappear is ultimately true. In the end, the crew defeats Lamu, and Yoko, Tao, MC, and Sahori have one of those iconic SMT heartwarming moments together. This is where the chaotic and confusing stuff starts. But again, I'm not mad at it, as I will take this over base SMT5 story every day of the week. This moment made my jaw hit the ground. Something that I couldn't say about anything regarding Vanilla V story-wise. This is followed by Tao being resurrected miraculously, much like the Arc 2 finale of the previous game. The thing is, this time is she doesn't appear in her divine form, just back as regular Tao. This is what I'm talking about earlier with the very off moments being sprinkled in with otherwise pretty good stuff, which is immediately followed by Yuzuru and Dazai conveniently arguing 5 meters away from everyone while all of this is going down. Dazai presumably screwed up while protecting a group of students, including Miyazu, causing her to get kidnapped. Don't worry though, because Tao says she knows for a fact that Miyazu's safe. Well,
because I'm a saint, I guess.
After they compose themselves, they immediately follow the tracks of the missing students and make their way to the second area of the game. So yeah, a lot of stuff just happened here. After a relatively similar first act of the game, the narrative blasts the player with a bunch of new story events and threads, almost like it's trying to signify that here is where the story branches off from the original, in extreme fashion. I still think this could have been executed better, in particular the stuff to do with Tao. But overall, the sudden death of Sahori was a pretty cool way to break the player's expectations, and again, way better than what happens in Creation. The end of Act 2 and the entirety of Act 3, in my opinion, are the strongest points of the game. The beginning of the second act is largely the same, aside from the fact that Tao and Yoko are still accompanying you, and strike up casual yet very philosophically charged conversations. Yoko's extremism when it comes to chaotic viewpoints is honestly kind of funny and hard to take seriously at points, but the effect that it has on Tao is what's most interesting to me, as it seemed like her influence was making her inherently less law-pilled than what she otherwise would have been. Once you get to the fairy village, you talk with Yuzuru, who still hasn't found his sister, and laments her existence in a world which is inherently unfair. He shows his chaos allegiance here, as he questions why a world created by an all-loving god would house people such as her, who are predisposed to having an incredibly hard time trying to simply survive and enjoy themselves. This leads into one of the best moments of the game at the end of the second arc. One of the Qadištu, Aishith, is revealed to be responsible for the kidnappings instead of Lamu, who is now deceased. The game clearly indicates throughout the arc that she will be the one who the party will be fighting as the Arc 2 boss. However, in a moment of weakness, Yuzuru submits to Aishith's offer to fight and kill the protagonist in exchange for Miyazu's life. After defeating him, Aishith proceeds to consume and kill Miyazu, which is interrupted by Dazai sending a fire attack straight towards the both of them. Here is where Kansu shows up and casts a reflective barrier on Miyazu, allowing for the fire to hit Aishith alone. The funniest part about this scene is that if Kansu didn't do this, Dazai probably would have killed Miyazu. Which would suck, but honestly would be hilarious and interesting to see how Yuzuru would react if this actually happened. Before Aishith can engage the students, she is interrupted by the third Qadištu member, Egret. She states that the Crow of Crows has taken roost nearby, and that she must come back to her base of operations immediately. Without too much of an objection, she does so, leaving everybody unharmed. This piece doesn't last long though, as one of the members of the fairy village comes to the scene pleading for help, leading them back to the village where everyone has been turned to salt. I really like this sequence of events to wrap up Act 2, as it gives extra stakes in the story and also provides Yuzuru with a lot more complexity that he previously had, being incredibly vulnerable and understanding his motivations as a Chaos rep a bit more coherently. The third arc, which is my personal favorite, feels like an entirely different game due to the different area map, allowing for both the overworld and story experience to be unrelatable to the original. We get to Shinjuku due to an investigation launched by Bethel, Japan, not only regarding the salt statues of people but also members of Tokyo falling into sudden illness. With the two leads being the previously mentioned Crow and a fortune teller, the party explores the new area with these objectives in mind. Before they get the chance to act, Angels of Bethel attack the team without notice. If the alarm bells weren't sounding off for Bethel already, this arc definitely sets them off. After about halfway through exploring the map, we are interrupted by Bethel Japan summoning us back to HQ, with the unfortunate news that Miyazu has been kidnapped again. This leads to Yuzuru having another mental crisis, as he becomes completely demoralized by the fact that he couldn't help her again. This time, Dazai tries to cheer him up, and the guys have a bro moment in the MC's dorm as they resolve to team up and save her once HQ tracks her whereabouts. A nice heartfelt moment, and no double murder from Lilith this time either. They track her down to Bethel Egypt HQ and infiltrate the base of operations, but ultimately come to the terms with the fact that they can't fight with Bethel Japan and protect her at the same time. Kansu promises to keep Miyazu safe, and Yuzuru begrudgingly accepts this outcome. After returning to Shinjuku, we meet the incredibly trustworthy Archangel Mastama. Here he reveals that he was the one who turned people into salt. The reason why being that with humans being unable to expel Magatsuhi in that form, the Qadištu cannot feed it into their plan to summon an ancient goddess. To demonstrate this fact, Mastama turns Dazai into salt right in front of everyone. He assures them that he will change him back, and in again, a very confusing moment, Tao, Yoko, and the MC leave without saying a word. I don't know if that's because they realize it's pointless to fight Mastama at this point, or maybe they just find Dazai annoying and don't care about what happens to him. I like to think it's the latter. Regardless, next to no time passes, and Mastama unsaltifies Dazai, and gives him a divine blessing that grants him power like the Nahobino with a bright, blinding light. After the scene, the camera pans down to MC, Tao, and Yoko, who, I kid you not, 50 feet away from where this is happening, don't seem to notice that anything is going wrong. If you haven't noticed already, this is a very common theme with this game. Very cool, interesting story beats, mixed in with very goofy and oddly timed stuff within minutes. Afterwards, the team returns to Tokyo and finds that there is a Magatsuhi trap at Jozoji Temple that is harvesting from a few hundred innocents throughout the area. They come here to disable the trap but are stopped by Yakumo and Nua, who the team has run into a few times throughout Shinjuku. After fighting and defeating them, Yoko calls Yakumo a hypocrite for using Nua to achieve his goals despite staunchly believing that demons have no place amongst humans. He proves that this isn't the case by driving a sword through Nua and using her Magatsuhi to heal him, stating that demons are but a means to an end for him. After a run-in with Egret, we get to the government building that is said to house the Qadištu's plans to summon the previously mentioned goddess. After being lured yet again into the Qadištu summoning area, we find out that Yoko is actually an agent of theirs and was plotting to betray us from the beginning. I didn't realize this at the time, but there was actually a lot of evidence in the game previously alluding to this actually happening. The fact that she appears at the exact same time as Glacia Labialis at the beginning of the game, the fact that when you take her hand in the intro sequence, the voices tell you that you've set the world's path towards destruction. Despite this, Yoko can't bring herself to actually do it, and you end up fighting all 4 Qadištu at once with her on the team. After you defeat them, you actually lose, and their preparations to summon the goddess is already complete. In order to revive her, a descendant of the god who slayed her must be used as an essence. Aogami, being that said descendant, is exactly what they need to complete the summoning. They call for the entity, named Tiamat, and mortally wound Tao as well as the Nahobino. Alongside him, 3 of the Qadištu are absorbed by Tiamat, and Lilith forces her will to be ingrained within Yoko. While being consumed, Aogami protects the MC by pushing him out of Tiamat's summoning at the last minute, as only the essence of the horn god Susanoo is needed, and not the soul of the human. This scene then cuts to Tiamat being summoned and just destroying some towers, and killing Nua for funsies, and then emerging back into the Qadištu realm that we just visited. Why did it do this instead of just destroying everything? Like many other things, we don't know and it's not explained. My guess would be that Mastama stopped it from doing so, as it's revealed later on that he has full control over her. The protagonist comes to in the aftermath of a fight between Dazai and Yuzuru with their respective Nahobino counterparts. Koshimizu lies unconscious and Yuzuru is being strangled by Abdiel. In front of the MC's eyes, Abdiel kills Yuzuru and Dazai is back to his edgelord self from the creation route. I have mixed feelings on Dazai heel turning again, when that was probably the worst moment from the original's bare bones story, but at the same time I at least respect it, As you'll see in the future, they almost play into it instead of trying to retcon everything. After they leave, Koshimizu and MC send off Yuzuru in a respectful fashion. Now, I'm definitely not happy that Yuzuru died, but I've seen a lot of people say that it ruined any possible redemption that the character could have had. I would have to disagree with that, as I think, for one, Yuzuru already had more depth in the first half of the game compared to the entirety of Vanilla V. But his death gave us a good basis for the eventual chaos ending of the game. Yuzuru's ambitions to become a Nahobino and change the unfair structure of the world was ultimately cut short by those trying to establish order. So even though he couldn't be a part of it, and also wouldn't have agreed with the outcome of Vengeance's chaos ending, it gives us more fuel to explore that idea, and also gives the game an avenue to explore Abdel and Dazai as villains as opposed to the very awkward and shitty law reps from the original. After all this goes down, there's only one thing left to do, which is Koshimizu bringing the MC to the Bethel Labs to fuse with him as he no longer has his knowledge alive. Aogami being based off of Koshimizu's body makes this fusion possible, alongside the fact that he and Koshimizu are from the same family of gods. Here it's revealed that Koshimizu is Tsukuyomi, who is the brother of Aogami, or Susanoo, in Japanese mythology. They fuse into a new Nahobino design that somehow tops the original in one of the coolest cutscenes in the game. Now, I know I'm not alone in thinking this, but I wish that this wasn't advertised to hell in the trailers and promo material for the game. I understand that Atlus needs to convince people to buy it, but this moment would have been maybe my favorite in Mega 10 history if I wasn't aware of exactly what was going to happen once Aogami died. Which, if you watched this previous video of mine, I already knew was going to happen. So the game post-Aogami death is a divisive point for a lot of people from what I understand. I've seen a lot of opinions on the direction the story goes in after this point. Many people saying that it fell off a cliff or became comically bad after this scene. I wouldn't go that far personally, as there are still some very cool moments that we haven't gotten to yet, but the inconsistency that I've been mentioning throughout this video definitely becomes more severe after this point. Nonetheless, we decide that the best course of action is to invade Shakan, which is known to be the source of power for the Shekinah glory. For those who don't know, that's what's keeping Tokyo alive past the God of Law's death. After completing the dungeon, we find a confrontation between Yoko and Abdiel. Yoko absorbs the power from the Shekinah glory and disappears in an instant. This is, again, not fully explained, but I suspect what's going on here is that the God of Law used Yoko's goddess powers as a source of fuel for making the Shekinah glory possible after his death. I suspect this because we don't see Yoko as a goddess at all before the scene, but again, this is speculatory. After a fight with Abdiel, there is only one area left to go. I feel like some of the reason why people felt this game fell off after this point is because you go straight from a brand new area with nothing but new content and story beats to an area you've already seen before where the task of gathering the 3 keys to reach the Empyrean is still the main objective. There obviously are some changes here, however. Starting with the previously placed Vasuki fight, you see him dying with this red aura around him. I don't know exactly what happened here, but Beelzebub kills him right in front of you and kind of appears out of nowhere. He will then ask you what your intentions are, and even if you give the chaos-aligned answer, he will still fight you for the key of austerity. In the same area, you also run into Yakumo, who tells you after Nua sacrificed herself for him that he's quitting. Like, just straight up quitting. Not like he had a choice, as he can't ascend the throne without her, but gives into the idea that the protagonist and Koshimizu are the only ones who could protect Tokyo, which is ultimately what he wants. Going back to Ueno, this time you fight Zeus and Odin together, gaining the 2 remaining keys at the same time. If you haven't noticed already, the whole political tension stuff between the different factions of Bethel isn't really present in this route with the exception of Bethel, Egypt. I will say that this is the only aspect of Creation's story that I kinda missed this time around. Once we get to the Empyrean, we are stopped by Dazai and Abdiel at the entrance. This is where Dazai goes full edge mode. One thing I admire about Vengeance's route is the fact that Tao doesn't act like a total robot after ascending to her goddess form. She actually reacts like how a normal person would if Edgelord Dazai was berating them with words that weren't even in his vocabulary 10 in-game hours ago. After avenging Yuzuru's death, the protagonist and Tao ascend the Empyrean, which again plays out similarly to the canon of creation. That is until you get to the throne itself. The previous bosses in this area no longer exist. Nua is dead, Yuzuru is dead, Abdiel and Dazai are both dead. So with no one else in the picture, Tao encourages you to take her hand with the intention for creation. That is, until you're stopped by a Panagia palette swap, who is shortly revealed to be Yoko. She's shocked by the fact that the MC is alive and that Tao is a goddess, but that obviously doesn't stop her from butting heads with Tao. Here is where they both lay out their visions for what will happen once the protagonist takes hold of the throne. Both of them encourage you to go with them as opposed to the other, and here is where the alignment lock happens. At the very end of the game. You don't get the choice here, by the way. The decisions you make throughout the game will lock you into either the chaos or law ending. All of the conversations that you had with these two throughout the game regarding stuff like the existence of cars or specific side quest options decides what the ending of the game will be. This works a whole lot better here as opposed to Vanilla V, where any alignment choices had no impact on the story itself. You either choose law, neutral, or chaos before entering the Empyrean, and that's what you got. If you reject Yoko's ideals, she refuses to accept the outcome and finally summons Tiamat to fight you. If you side with Yoko, Mastema appears, denouncing your divinity and overrides Yoko's authority to summon Tiamat and reveals that he can control her himself. How? Again, not explained. The only thing I could think of is that he's not actually an agent of Bethel, but actually one belonging to the great will of humanity. This can be explained through the hidden boss, Satan, where you need Mastema himself to summon him. After that fight, and regardless of what route you take, Tiamat regenerates herself and proves to be undefeatable by conventional means. Berating the party with lasers afterwards, everyone becomes mortally wounded. Before Tiamat can finish the job, Aogami's previously thought to be lost essence escapes Tiamat and saves the protagonist. For the third time in this game, they reenact the first scene of the game literally word for word, bar for bar. It's probably the cheesiest moment I could think of in any Atlas game I've played, but I'm not gonna lie, I was kinda smiling during this part. While this is happening, Koshimizu uses his leftover Magatsuhi to save the life of whichever goddess you are aligned with. Aogami explains that Tiamat's weakness is a conceptual one, where she in her current form can only be defeated by a dragon slayer, which is exactly what Aogami is. They fuse together again and he creates a Murakumo Wrath Tempest fusion move and kills Tiamat in one blow. Then, depending on the alignment you chose, you will either fight Tahom or Mastema. After this, you fight Lucifer again to cap things off in somewhat anticlimactic fashion, and the game is over. In the law ending, everything is restored, with Tao, Yuzuru, and even Yoko still alive and enjoying themselves in a school setting. An ideal world where everyone's wishes are granted exists. In the chaos ending, the MC and Yoko are alone next to the Tree of Life, and Lilith's serpent next to them. I'm sure you could spot the reference there. But I believe from what I understand about the concept, that this is the only scenario where the universe has a chance to be freed from the mandala system that Lucifer mentions in all of the possible SMT5 endings. I think this is one of the more unique ways that SMT has historically handled the end results of each alignment, with the law ending actually being understandable for the first time in forever. At the same time, the chaos ending is very intriguing in contrast, as it's unknown as to what will happen next. Each ending, as always, has flaws that are easy to identify. Like, yeah, the law ending looks great from what the game shows, but in this path, the world is not free from Mandala's system, despite what Lucifer would have you believe. In the chaos ending, although the world is free from the Mandala system, there is no way to tell that that will actually stay that way, or if it's a good thing for humanity at all. So yeah, that's SMT5 Vengeance. This is without a doubt the type of story that they wanted to tell from the beginning. There are a few pretty bad issues that hold it back from being considered good to great from Atlas story standards, but I will say that it's incredibly memorable, for better or worse. That's about all I can ask for. It's clear that they didn't want to retcon a lot of the structure and character motivations from the original route, which I'm glad they did. And even considering that, I think they did a good job overall. Even though I have a lot of qualms about the writing, with clarity and pacing still being massive problems that weren't really improved upon, the fact that there were compelling story moments at all make this the best way to experience SMT on modern platforms without a doubt. If there's one thing that I could say about the game, it's that it gives me confidence about what the series can do going forward. I hope that they take the lessons learned from this 8-year process that culminated in SMT5 and give us more cohesive writing with the eventual SMT6. Again, the game sold very well, so thankfully that's a matter of when and not if. For me though, this is not the last time I'll be covering the game. I want to make a video surrounding both releases of SMT5 that covers gameplay related topics, as well as what lore implications surround the hidden boss that you fight after completing the game's many endings. For those interested in this or any other Atlas topics, please consider subscribing. Until next time.